My sleeping heart rate is 30. My resting heart rate as low as 36. 27 is the world record. The official record for the lowest resting heart rate is 27, held by Martin Brady, measured officially by Guinness World Records, and for 1 minute. Then there is French cyclist Martine Fourcade, who posted a screenshot of a heart rate of 25 beats per minute to his Instagram. The question here is, was this just for a second or 10 seconds? In other words, is it just pulse, or was this the minimum value, or is it a heart rate or a pulse rate, the pulse averaged over 1 minute? Also, since the right axis is cut off, this also might not be resting, but actually sleeping heart rate, which ranges from 40 to 50 in most people compared to the wake resting heart rate, where the healthy range is often cited as 60 to 100 beats per minute. Then there is my Samsung Health data showing a heart range for the last 12 months of 30 to 200, which means my heart rate was as low as 30 and as high as 200. But I unfortunately cannot compare this to the two above. There is a difference between resting heart rate awake, what could also be called resting heart rate, but is the one when asleep, and one could call this the sleeping heart rate, or the sleeping resting heart rate, or simply the minimum heart rate like Samsung Health does. Since then, the sleeping heart rate is usually lower than the awake resting heart rate, between 40 to 50 beats per minute, but one might take these numbers with a grain of salt, since the population in general becomes older and increasingly, due also to the demographic change, the first point, and also increasingly in terms of body fat, seemingly unhealthier. Therefore, similar to the often cited normal range for heart rate, the American Heart Rate Association states the normal resting adult human heart rate is 60 to 100 beats per minute heart rate on the Wikipedia. The range of 40 to 50 might not be the range that one would choose as objective in terms of sleeping heart rate. In short, lower is better when trying to optimize for longevity. What is heart rate and what is pulse? Again, cited by Wikipedia, heart rate or pulse rate is the frequency of the heartbeat measured by the number of contractions of the heart per minute, beats per minute, or BPM. Wikipedia, heart rate. Pulse is the infinitely small rate, the derivative, in other words, the incline of the graph, whereas heart rate in beats per minute is an average of the beats, you guessed it, per minute, similar to how one could drive faster and slower on a bike within a minute, but the average speed would be in between. One problem now is that the pulse, similar to speed measured in miles or kilometers per hour, is again usually displayed in miles per hour or kilometers per hour, or in meters per second maybe also. There is also average resting heart rate, that is using a bigger time frame. Despite pulse being the actual incline of the graph, time in beats per minute as the axis, one could, similar to how resting heart rate already is the average of pulse in a minute, also determine an even bigger time frame for the resting heart rate. Mine, with the time frame of 7 days, was the lowest at 45, both on Samsung as well as Garmin in the last years. Currently, it's 46 for 7 days. This means during the 168 hours of the week, the average was in this case 46 in the case of the image I inserted in the blog post. But a few weeks ago, but also years ago, the weekly or even monthly average already was as low as 45. What is the metric for longevity, the better metric for longevity? One has to choose a time frame. Just because one has once a low resting heart rate doesn't mean one should maybe eat junk food for the rest of the year, given that this would be the yearly average resting heart rate. Therefore, ideally the measurement would be both continuous, meaning all data is included in the calculation, as well as cover large time frames. So let's say time frames, let's say an hour. Given that we already use days, weeks, months, and years as the most useful time frames, it probably makes sense to take these. The larger the time frame, the longer it now takes for a marginal unit of increased health optimization effort to show. Therefore, choosing the time frame of comparison is a balancing act between forcing a long-term view, but also enabling people to see the actual progress displayed in this metric. According to Peter Attia, a public MD advocating for longevity optimization, VO2 max, properly measured, is highly correlated with longevity. as he says in a clip found on YouTube. But many people don't routinely measure the VO2 max, so one could substitute the actual measurement, properly done in a lab, with a mask and so on and so forth, and then increasingly with higher running speeds, intensity, on a treadmill, you measure what the gas that is coming out of your mouth, the air that is coming out of your mouth consists of. And then you can see at which point the VO2 max threshold is hit, and after this the body switches, at least to some parts, to an aerobic energy production. On the other hand, a lot of services like Apple Health, Garmin Connect, Samsung Health approximate your VO2 max, since there is a correlation in between VO2 max and other values, such as how well you are able to run on a certain distance with a certain pulse rate, for example. Or one could take an even more common metric, resting heart rate, and therefore not rely on VO2 max, properly or improperly measured or approximated. Resting heart rate is already an average, the average per minute and or extended time frame. This is what proper VO2 max measuring would look like. So here I inserted a video from Shevin Shares, a YouTuber that has done a VO2 max measuring test. In summary, a few years ago I sold my Polar running watch with chest strap because it showed me a ridiculous 40 to 45 resting heart rate while reading books. At least this was one of the reasons. In 2020 I first began measuring my heart rate again with wrist-based devices. First the Samsung Galaxy Fit, then the Galaxy Active 2, then the Samsung Galaxy Watch 4, and now I wear both the Watch 4 and the Garmin Fenix 6S Pro to benefit mostly from both services metrics. Samsung, for example, misses out on displaying HRV, but also to have redundancy. Was my sleep really that bad, or did maybe the watch just not properly record it? Let's see what the other watch says. As I began to look more into my data, also with Garmin Connect offering a web version of their app, I would discover that my minimum heart rate was actually quite low. My resting heart rate, in comparison, excluding the lower sleeping heart rate or the minimum heart rate, also recorded in Samsung Health via the first Galaxy Fit, then Active 2, then Watch 4 in the last years, was as low as 36 for single days, as low as 40 in total for a year from November 2019 to November 2020, with the lowest month being March, with an average resting heart rate, not as mentioned before, 40, but an average resting heart rate for an entire month as low as the 36 beats per minute that were measured as the lowest heart rate yesterday in a given day, which obviously is not the average of the day, which amazed me. No recording, no data. If I had only jumped on the tracking train 1 year later, I would now miss the periods of lowest heart rates I ever had, which is not really true, because I might have had an even better heart health, at least as far as heart health is approximated by low resting and sleeping heart rate, excluding the degradation that goes on in terms of age earlier in my life. The same could be said for all the things one could track now, but doesn't. All these values might seem unuseful today. As long as one is healthy, being healthy is uninteresting. But once one isn't, it's all one wishes for.